Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Pei Dalet 84 in Sanhedrin. We're in the ninth parak of Sanhedrin. Let me share my screen and we'll get really started. So yesterday we learned a brisa that detailed a series of 11 actions that are punished with death at the hands of heaven, and another three actions that are subject to a prohibition. And then finally, we had two more actions where Rebbe says the punishment is death at the hands of heaven, while Chachamim say that the actions are just prohibited. And so that was a very long and detailed brisa, and then we had essentially the Gemara went through each of the elements of the brisa to try and identify why the halacha is as was detailed in the brisa. So we went through yesterday the first 11 actions and provided sources for their being punished with death at the hands of heaven. And these are all, different things associated with the Beis Hamikdash. And one can understand why they're here because we are in the middle of talking about death penalty cases. And so here, just as we're about to go into the next chapter, which we will begin today, and which deals with the final of the four forms of death penalty, right? We started with stoning. Then in this chapter, we did burning and beheading, and we're left with just strangulation, and that will be the one that we will cover later today. But before we got to that, we've now dealt with the question of what are some of the other sins for which one is subject to the death penalty, but is not. But that death penalty is not necessarily implemented by humanity, but rather imposed by Hashem. So again, we had 11 that are punished by the death of the hands of heaven, and now we have three more actions that are prohibited but are not actually punished with death, whether by the hands of heaven or by man. So we're at the second to last line on Pei Gimel Amud Bet with Aval. This is all quoting from this long brisa. And so the quote from the long brisa is Aval Arel Onein Yoshev Ba'azhara, that when it comes to an Arel, somebody who's not circumcised, and Onein, somebody who has lost a close relative, and who has not yet been buried, and Yoshev, one who is sitting, if you are in any of those three categories while you are performing the services in the Beit HaMikdash ba'azhara, then you are subject to a warning. It's a negative command, but it's not. But there's not going to be any kind of death penalty, and you're not going to get kares either. Arel minalan. So how do I know that in fact an arel, somebody who's not circumcised, is subject to just a general negative prohibition? Rav Chisda davar zeh mitoras Moshe Rabbeinu lo lamadnu, that we did not learn this directly from Moshe, but rather Achiba Yechezkel ben Buzi v'lamanu. But rather, if you take a look in Sefer Yechezkel, Yechezkel, whose father was Buzi, so it's referred to as Yechezkel ben Buzi. He's the one who tells us, because what does he say? Kol ben nechar erel leiv. And we turn to Pei Dalet Amud Aleph, V'erel basar lo yavo el mikdashi. So Yechezkel the Navi says that somebody who's a stranger, whether they're uncircumcised of heart or uncircumcised of flesh, they shall not come into my temple. So the idea of lo yavo, Rashi says, for top line on Pei Dalet Amud Aleph, lo yavo v'hainu azhara. That is the warning. That is the midivrei Kabbalah from our received tradition, ba'alma, and it's a general rule, v'lo lakiala. And as a result, according to Rashi, you do not get even malchus on this. Now, that's not a universal position, but clearly here Rashi is understanding this, that because it's not directly from the Torah, you're not going to get lashes associated with it. Okay, so that is the first of the three categories. The second of the categories is onain. So the Gemara continues as we continue on the second line of Pei Daled Amud Aleph, onain minalan. So how do I know that an onain's covered it? Diksiv min hamikdash lo yetzev lo yichalel es mikdash elokav. So when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol loses a relative, so the discussion in Sefer Vayikra, Parakaf Aleph, Pasuk Yud Bet, says that the Kohen Gadol does not leave the temple when a relative dies. What is the implication of saying specifically the Kohen Gadol doesn't leave the temple when a relative dies? Ha'achar shelo yatzach hillel. The implication is that somebody else who is not the Kohen Gadol would absolutely need to leave the temple. And if they did not leave the temple, then there would be some kind of profaning, because it says lo yetzeh v'lo yichalel. So the implication is that if another non-Kohen Gadol were to do exactly what the Kohen Gadol was doing, it would be a profaning to remain in the Beis Hamikdash. So again, so that answers the question as to how do we know that an onain. So we don't have it explicitly in a pasuk, but it's implicit in a pasuk. So Amarle Rav Ada Rava v'nele chilo chilo mitruma. Well, 1 second, we see that this verse references profaning, and we have a Gzeira Shava that connects profaning in other cases to the profaning of Truma. And then remember that profaning of Truma was one of the sins, meaning if you were to be Tameh and have and eat Truma, you would be subject to the death penalty at the hands of heaven. And so as a result, maybe we should say, Mala Halan B'misa, Avkan B'misa. So we should say that just as eating Truma when one's Tameh, you are subject to death at the hands of heaven, the B'dei Shemayim. So too, if you have, if a Kohen serves while being an Onain, maybe he's subject to the death at the hands of heaven. So miksi beg begufe. Now, you can't actually say that, because yes, the pasuk says chilul, but that pasuk that says chilul is not directly talking about a regular Kohen. It's talking about a Kohen Gadol. And we just derived from that pasuk what the law would be for a regular Kohen. So mikse be begufe, is it really written in connection with a regular Kohen itself? No. Miklala ka'asa, you learned it out from the general rules that were said in connection with the Kohen Gadol. So havi davar haba min haklal. So it's a something that you derive from other rules. V'chol davar haba min haklal ain done in oso b'gzeira shava. You can't use a gzeira shava to connect to it, even though the topic that you are learning from may have something that could be a subject of a gzeira shava, as we have here with the word chilel, but we're not going to use that in order to tell us about the item that we derive from that pasuk. So that concludes our discussion of onain, and we conclude now with the third of the three actions that we say are just subject to a prohibition, Yoshev Minalan. So how do I know that there's a prohibition about serving in the Beit HaMikdash while sitting? So Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Kra, what does the pasuk say according to Rava? In the name of Rav Nachman, it says, Kivo b'char Hashem Elokecha, mikol shvatecha la'amod l'shares. For him, namely the Kohen, Hashem has chosen from all your tribes to do what? La'amod l'shares, to stand and to minister. So, and to serve. So the point is, la'amida b'chartiv, lo lishiva. You have to stand, and while you're doing the service, you cannot sit and do the service. So that is the third, again, another context where we're doing an implication and not a direct command. And so, so on some level, none of the three are explicit in the Torah, and all three are learned on some level by some kind of implication. Okay, so now we have the two areas where Rebbe and Chachamim argued in the Brisa. So the first of those areas is the following. Rebbe says, as shown on the screen in number 2, a blemished Kohen who performs the temple service is punished with death at the hands of heaven, whereas the Chachamim say that such a Kohen only violates a prohibition. So let's take a look and we'll see it inside. Balmum, again, we are now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines down on Pei Dalet Amud Aleph, third word from the end of the line. Balmum, Rebbe Omer B'misa. Rebbe says that you get death at the hands of heaven if you're a blemished Kohen who does service in the Beis Hamikdash. No, it's just a warning. It's just a negative commandment. My time of the Rebbe. What's the reasoning? What's Rebbe's logic? Tiksiv ach al el haparoches lo yavo. Because it says in the Torah that with respect to a Kohen that has some kind of blemish, that he should not come to the curtain, with the curtain that separates the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. V'yolav chil chil mitruma. And the pasuk continues with referencing a chilul. It's specifically, let's see if we can find the pasuk. Pasuk is Perek Kaf Aleph, pasuk Kaf Gimel in Vayikra. Ach el haparochas lo yavo, ve'el hamizbeach lo yigash, ki mumbo, v'lo yichalel es mikdashi, ki ani Hashem mekadeshchem. That again, you should not come to my altar, and he should, because he has a blemish, and he should not profane my temple, because I am Hashem who made him holy, or who made them holy. So the point is vayalev chilo chilo mitruma. So just as the chilul word is said in connection with a blemished kohen, the chilul word is said in connection with truma and malahalan b'misa avkan b'misa. And just as somebody who eats truma when he's tameh is subject to the death penalty by the hands of heaven, so too somebody who serves, a kohen who serves while he has a blemish, is subject to the death penalty at the hands of heaven. Well, 1 second. How do you know that in fact it's death by the hands of heaven? Maybe there's another chilul that the Torah references where the punishment in that context is not death by the hands of heaven, but rather kares. Malahalan b'kares, afkan b'kares. And so we should say that just as eating nosar is when you leave over the meat of the korban, whatever korban you're having, where it's a shlamim korban, that a korban you're allowed to eat from, or where whoever's allowed to eat. So there are other korbanot that Kohanim can eat from, and you don't eat it within the prescribed time frame, well, then that's a case of nosar. So in that situation, you're subject to the penalty of kares, being cut off from the Jewish people. Avkan b'kares. So maybe we should say that so too here, the blemished Kohen should be subject to kares. Mistabra mitruma havalei l'melev. Now, it makes more sense to learn it from the halacha of truma, shekain pasul haguf mipsul haguf, because when you have the issue of a tamei kohen eating truma, that is a problem in the body of the kohen who is eating the truma. And when you have a problem with a blemish kohen, that's a problem in the body of the kohen. Whereas when it comes to eating the korban too late, there's not a problem necessarily in the human being who's doing the eating. The problem is just the time that's associated with the eating. So as a result, it doesn't seem to align as well. So the Gemara says, 1 second, Adarabba, I could say exactly the opposite. Minoser havalei. There's a reason to learn more from Noser, Shekain Kodesh, because listen, when it comes to Nosar, you're talking about something that is sacred in the Beit HaMikdash. So too, obviously, serving in the Beit HaMikdash would be is sacred. Pinim, it's inside the Temple Mount. And so similarly, Pinim applies also to a Kohen serving in the Beit HaMikdash with a mum. Pigul, the person is subject the nosar, the korban, is subject to pigul, which is the thinking that you're going to eat it in the wrong time or place, and vinosar, and it's subject to not eating it too late. And those, of course, also apply to a kohen who is serving in the temple if he has a blemish. So all four of these apply. And so there are more bases to say that it's like nosar than it is to say, yes, there was one key element that said it was more like eating truma, but there are more that say that it's not like that. It's more like nosar. So as a result, the Gemara rejects the first answer and offers an alternative answer. Ella mitamish shimish gamar. No, we're going to learn it not from somebody who's tamei and eats truma, but rather somebody who's tamei and serves in the Beit HaMikdash. So psul haguf mipsul haguf. And again, now we still have, because we're dealing with a kohen that's tamei, just as we had with truma, but now we're dealing with the service. So now it's still a psul haguf. We're still learning one bodily disqualification from another, and we have kodesh panim pigul vinosar, and we still have the other four. So now we have five that relate. Five items that are relevant if we try to learn from a kohen who's tamei who serves in the Beis HaMikdash, and we only have four mikodesh panim pigul v'nosar, and we have four that just and then when it comes to nosar, we would only have four. We would just have kodesh panim pigul v'nosar. So as a result, it makes much more sense to learn from a kohen who is tamei serving in the Beis HaMikdash, where the punishment is death by the hands of heaven, then it makes sense to learn from nosar, where the punishment is kares. So that all is the explanation of Rebbe, because remember, Rebbe is the one who says that a kohen who serves with a blemish is subject to the death penalty. So why don't the rabbis agree to that? V'Rabbanan, what about them? Why don't they agree with Rebbe? Amar Kra Vo. So the pasuk says, this pasuk is Vayikra Parakaf Bet pasuk Tet. It says, let's get the pasuk. The shamru es mishmarti. They should watch over my my laws, my watchings. Below yisua lav chet, and they shouldn't, as a result, be involved in any sin. Umesu, and then they die. Umesu vo, and they would die because of it. Ki yichalaluhu ani Hashem mikadesham. Because they would have profaned it, and I am the Lord who made you holy. So the point is that umesu bo in that pasuk, the reference there in that pasuk is to being tamei, and so the word bo is a narrowing word, and so the implication is bo v'lo balmum. So we're going to learn from it and not from another case. Now, let's take a look and see how Rashi helps us understand this a little bit more clearly. So we take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Pedal and Aleph, Amar Krabbo, Bitruma, that this pasuk is written in connection with Truma, Bimisa, and saying that that there is the death penalty, Dekulo, for somebody who eats it with, who is tamei. Dekulo nami mine gamri. And every one of, remember, all of the death penalty by the hands of heaven are all learned from the context of the misa that we give for that Hashem brings to somebody who eats truma who's tamei. V'asa bo l'miuta. And now the word bo comes to exclude the lo balmum, and to say, and not a balmum. Umistavra balmum hu dekamamait, and makes sense that we would exclude the blemish kohen from this rule, v'lo tamei, v'lo tvul yom, and not a tamei kohen or a tvul yom kohen, shehein psul tumasan, because they are part of the same category of tuma that is relevant in this pasuk. This pasuk is talking about a tamei kohen who eats truma, so it makes total sense to learn from this based on the Gzeira Shava to all other cases where you have some kind of tuma acting as a problem. So whether it's a tamei kohen serving in the Beit HaMikdash or a tvul yom, meaning somebody who has gone to the mikveh but it's still the daytime. It hasn't come to nighttime yet, and he now goes directly from the mikvah to the Beis Hamikdash and serves in the Beis Hamikdash. So too he will be subject to the death penalty because he's still got some aspect of tuma left on him. And so as a result, that's why we'll learn from the truma case to those cases, because those all involve tuma. But what won't we learn to? We won't learn to a balmum, and so that explains machlokas number 1 between Rebbe and the Chachamim. Now we get to machlokas number 2 between Rebbe and the Chachamim. Hazid b'meila, Rebbe omer b'misa, v'Chachamim omer b'azhara. If you purposefully and intentionally commit meila, steal something from the Beit Hamikdash, so again, Rebbe says you're subject to death at the hands of heaven, and the Chachamim say no, it's just a warning. So my time of the Rebbe, what's the reasoning of Rebbe that he would say that? So Amar Rebbe Abahu Gamar Chet Chet Mitruma. So we'll use a different Gzera Shava. We don't have the Gzera Shava of Chilul, apparently, at least at this moment, but rather we'll learn from the word sin, because the word sin is used both in connection with Me'ila. In Vayikra Hey, Perek, Pasuk Tesvav, it says, Nefesh Kisim Ol Ma'al V'chata Bishgaga Mikdashei Hashem, that if somebody commits a treachery and takes from the Beis Hamikdash unintentionally, so then that is Me'ila. So Me'ila ordinarily is effectively the only commandment that you can violate from a biblical perspective without doing it intentionally at all. So in regard to with respect to Truma, it says, V'shamru es mishmarti. This is Parakaf Bet Pasuk Tet in Vayikra. V'shamru es mishmarti v'lo yis'u alav chet umesu bo ki yichaluhu. So again, the word sin there is also used in connection with eating truma while tameh. So malahalim b'misa, avkan b'misa. So again, Rabbi says we're going to learn from one to the other. And the Rabbanan Amri and the rabbis say, no, the same reason that we didn't want to learn about a Balmum from a Gzeira Shava, we don't want to learn about a Me'ila from a Gzeira Shava. Amar Krab, bo, below Me'ila. It's meant to limit the situation. And again, back into Rashi, it's 3 lines down from where we finished the last Rashi. Bo v'lo b'me'ila, umimisa l'chuda hu da'amit. It's only from the death penalty that we are excluding. The gabi misa hu d'ksiv bo. That's why it's in particularly in that pasuk it says that the umesu bo. Right, that the word before bo is umesu, so it's specifically referring to death that the word bo is about. Aval azhara migamara gamar lahazi b'meila. But we can use this Gzeira Shava to tell us that, in fact, if one were to purposefully engage in Me'ila, so then you have, in fact, violated the prohibition. B'Gzeira Shava dechet chet mitruma. You can use that Gzeira Shava to learn from Truma to Me'ila, that just as Truma, if you do it intentionally, you're violating. So too, if you do Me'ila intentionally, even though ordinarily Me'ila in the Torah refers to doing it unintentionally, accidentally. So we'll say that actually also if you do it intentionally, you will have violated the Torah prohibition. Okay, so that finishes the brisa that we learned yesterday, and now we need to pick up back with the Mishnah that was all the way back on Pei Aleph Amud Bet, and we said in that Mishnah we had a machlokas, and the machlokas was, as again on the screen just under number 4, the machlokas was about a non-Kohen who serves in the Beit HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva said that he's punished by death by strangulation, and the Chachamim say no, he's punished by death by the hands of heaven. So we're going to go through that, and first we're going to cite a brisa that relates to this machlokus. Now again, remember, Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah said he's death by strangulation, and the Chachamim say death by the hands of heaven. We're going to have different people. We're not going to have any Rabbanan or Chachamim in this brisa, but we're going to have three different views, and you'll see how they align and what they say. So Tanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Rabbi Yishmael says, Nemar Khan, it says in connection with a non-Kohen serving in the Beis HaMikdash, V'hazar hakarev yumat, that the stranger who comes close is going to die, is going to be put to death. V'nemar lahalan, and it says in connection elsewhere in connection with the death of Korach's congregation that brought the fire pans. Kol hakarev el hamishkan Hashem yamut, that anybody who approached close to the tabernacle of Hashem will die. And so that pasuk, which is in connection with the story of Korach and his followers. So Malahalan bidei Shemayim, that over there, it's all talking about death by the hands of Hashem. As Rashi points out, Malahalan, next Rashi, Malahalan bidei Shemayim, B'matayim v'chamishim ish, de Korach, B'srufim ksiv, that we learn in the Torah that the 250 people who were with Korach, they were all burned, and that was a fire that came from heaven. So Afkan bidei Shemayim, so too, as a result, it will be only a death from the hands of heaven. So obviously Rabbi Yishmael here aligns with the Chachamim in our Mishnah. Now we come with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Nemar Kan v'hazar karev yumat, v'nemar lahalan v'hanabiyahu, ocholem hachalom hahu yumat. Well, let's take a look. We want to use the same word. When it came to somebody who's a stranger coming to the close and doing service in the Beit HaMikdash, it says yumat. Where else does it say yumat? It says yumat in connection with a prophet that is offering a false prophecy. So malahalan beskila, afkan beskila. So as a result, just as a false prophet gets skila, so too a non-Kohen who does service in the Beis HaMikdash gets skila. Now, if you're asking, well, 1 second, didn't we just say that in our Mishnah that Rabbi Akiva said the death was by strangulation? The Gemara will get there, and so you are right to wonder that, and just give us a few moments, and we'll get there. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, malahalan b'chenek, avkan b'chenek. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, no, the prophet who is the false prophet doesn't get stoning, he gets strangulation. So now we're going to break down, that was the brisa. Now we're going to break down and try and understand each element of the machlokas. So by my kamiflgi, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, what were Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael arguing about? Because one used the Gzeira Shava from the Adat Korach, from the Korach's rebellion, and one used the Gzeira Shava from a false prophet. So what's that? Why are they learning from different places? So Rabbi Akiva Savar done in Yumat miyumat. We have to use the same word. And in when it came to the Adat Korach, it said Yamut, not Yumat, and so as a result, I'm looking for the same word, Rabbi Akiva says. V'ein damin Yumat mi Yamut, and we don't derive a Yumat from Yamut, so as a result, that's why I'm going to focus on the false prophet. Rabbi Yishmael suffered done in Hedyot mehedyot, and Rabbi Yishmael says, no, a prophet is a non-common person, and so as a result, let's focus on situations where a regular person is getting punished. And so that is the case when it comes to the people of Adat Korach who went in and served and tried to bring the fire pans of of with the Ketores. So the ain done in Hedyot Minavi, and we should not learn from a commoner to a prophet, from a prophet to a commoner. And again, the situation, this pasuk that Rabbi Akiva is citing to, is a prophet who offers a false prophecy. But Rabbi Akiva has a great response. For Rabbi Akiva, why does Rabbi Akiva not agree that we should focus on regular people rather than a prophet? Kevan shehidiach ein lecha hedyot gadol mizeh. Well, listen, this prophet is trying to subvert the people to worship other gods. And there's nothing more regular than that. So we should not treat this person with any special respect. And therefore, Yumat is a better learning than Yumat to Yamut, or from Yamut to Yumat. Okay, so that is the first half of our Brisa's argument. So, Pamai Kamivlgi Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Well, what are Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri argue about? So, that's funny. They have a wrong translation here in the art scroll. And so on putting in the right translation. Okay. And so what are they arguing about? But plug to the Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan, they're arguing about the machlokas that we will see in in 5 days or so, a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Because what do we have? We have a brisa that teaches the following: Titania Navi shehidiach biskila, that the Tanna Kama says that a prophet that undermines and encourages people to engage in idolatry, he's killed by stoning. Rabbi Shimon Omer Bechenek, and Rabbi Shimon says, no, it is not stoning, but rather strangulation. So 1 second, Ha'anan Tanan, Rabbi Akiva Omer Bechenek. 1 second, the question that I teed up a few moments ago, that Rabbi Akiva says in our Mishnah, strangulation. So Rabbi Akiva seems to be arguing with himself. So Trei Tanai Aliba de Rabbi Akiva. There are two viewpoints within Rabbi Akiva. So Masnis and Rabbi Shimon Valiba de Rabbi Akiva. Our Mishnah that was Rabbi Shimon according to the Rabbi Akiva. That's why, and in our Mishnah, he says strangulation, which is exactly what Rabbi Shimon says in the Brisa. And the Brisa, Rabbanan Valiba de Rabbi Akiva. And the Brisa follows the rabbis according to Rabbi Akiva. And that's why Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa says that the punishment is not strangulation, but rather stoning. That's like the Tanna Kama of that other Brisa that, again, we will see in a few days. And so that concludes Hadron alach Eloheina Nisrafin, Hadron alach Eloheina Nisrafin, Hadron alach Eloheina Nisrafin. And so now we come to the beginning of the next parak. And here there's an interesting note, and that there's some question about the correct sequence, because if you were to go into a set of Mishnayos, usually Parak HaChelek, which is the 11th chapter in the Gemara, is shown as the 10th chapter of the Mishnayos. Basically we can, but Rashi at the beginning, I think, of the next chapter says that in fact, or implies that this is really the right order, that, and it makes sense, because what have we been dealing with so far? We've been dealing with, the last several chapters have been dealing with the various forms of death penalty. We began with skila, we then went to sreifa and hereg, and there's one left that we haven't done, namely chenek, strangulation. And so it makes perfect sense that we would now go on to strangulation. So let's take a look and see what the Gemara, what the Mishnah says. So Eluhein hanechnakim. These are the ones who get strangulation. Hamake aviv imo, one who hits his mother and father. Gonev nefesh miYisrael, one who kidnaps somebody. V'zakin mamre al pi beistin, somebody who is part of the beistin and rebels against their conclusion. So they say that something is mutter, and he rejects that and says it's usher, or vice versa. He says it's mutter, and they said it was usher, and he continues to teach that his teaching. Unavi hasheker, or a false prophet. or somebody who prophesies not in the name of Hashem, but in some false god, one who commits adultery, or Adim Zomamin, who are trying to kill the daughter of a Kohen who had an illegal relationship and who would be ordinarily burned, but they don't get the same punishment she gets, but rather they get the punishment of strangulation. Ubo and similarly, the person who has relations with the daughter of a Kohen, he also does not get the burning that the daughter of the Kohen gets, but rather he gets strangulation. And so that is the list of people that are subject to strangulation. So now the Gemara asks, we try to offer the source. Sorry for not scrolling. Sorry, we offer the source for the fact that hitting a parent is punished with strangulation. So makeh aviv ve'imo minalan. How do I know that that's the punishment? Diksiv umakeh aviv ve'imo mos yumas. The Torah says mos yumas. V'kol miza amura b'Torah stam. Anytime it says that you're going to put somebody to death, eino elachenek. That's talking about strangulation. So ema ad katale mikdal. So maybe it refers to a situation where he's actually killing his parent and not necessarily where he is just hitting his parent. Salka daita. Can you really think that that would be the case? Katal chad b'sayif. You kill somebody other than your parent, you get beheading. And then when you kill, if somebody were to kill his father, he would be subject to strangulation, which is a less strict form of execution according to the Rabbanan than beheading. How could that possibly be? Certainly, it's worse to kill one's father. So So yes, this is a great point and a great proof according to the viewpoint that says strangulation is the more lenient form or the less severe form of death penalty. But according to Rabbi Shimon, who says that it's that the strangulation is more severe than beheading, now it all of a sudden makes sense. Maybe it really is this way that you get that somebody who kills a regular person is going to get beheading, and somebody who kills a parent would get strangulation because strangulation is more severe. So no, not necessarily, because listen, rather we're going to prove that even Rabbi Shimon would agree that we're dealing with a situation that it cannot be that you're killing the parent from the following, because there are psukim in the Torah that talk about hitting and give the context of saying that the hitting involves killing, because elamidiksiv makeh ish v'meis mos yumas. We have a pasuk that says that somebody who hits a person and he dies, so then that murderer shall be put to death. Uksiv, and it says another pasuk. So that pasuk was Shmot Perakaf Aleph pasuk Yibet. So a couple parshio to go. Uksiv ove eva hiko v'yado v'yamot, and similarly, or the pasuk in Bamidbar Perak Lamed Hey pasuk Kaf Aleph, where you hit somebody with his hand and he died. And again, it says you hit somebody and he died. So Shmamina. So we see from these two psukim. Kol hecha deika haka stam lav misahu. Anytime where there's just plain hitting, it doesn't involve death. V'itzrich l'michtav makei ish, v'itzrich l'michtav kol makei nefesh. Well, why did I need two psukim to tell us this principle? I'm sorry, my apologies. So so now that we have this idea that it says that clearly whenever it says you're hitting somebody, it requires that he died. So now the Gemara goes on a brief aside to ask us a question, why it needs two different verses to tell us about the prohibition of murder. We need the pasuk to tell us, again, that's a pasuk in Shmo Kaf Aleph Pasuk Yud Bet, to tell us that whenever you hit somebody and he dies, meaning that you kill somebody, you are going to be put to death. And we need the pasuk that says that whenever you strike a human soul, that you need to kill the murderer. So in both psukim, they tell us that there's the punishment of death. So because if we only had the first pasuk of talking about hitting a person and he dies, havamina ish devar mitzvah, I would think that it's talking about ish who's a bar mitzvah, meaning who's an adult. Only that one would be say, only yes for that. But katan, but a minor who is not yet subject to mitzvos, maybe there would be no death penalty to kill a minor. So kazav rachmana kol make nefesh. So that's why the Torah needs to say that whoever kills any human being, make nefesh, a soul, is broader than ish. So ve'i kasav rachmana kol make nefesh. All right, so maybe we should just have the pasuk that says that anyone who strikes a human soul, and I would know that it would mean even a minor. So, but if we only had that, hava amina afilu nephalim, I might have thought that even a non-viable baby, afilu ben shmona, such as a baby that was born after 8 months of pregnancy. And in the Gemara times, basically, if you had an 8-month pregnancy, you were pretty much assured that that child, the infant, would not survive infancy and would die usually within the first 30 days. So as a result, and I might think that killing such a baby also subjects you to the death penalty. And the answer is it does not. So therefore, tzriche, that's why we need to say, make ish the mace, that it has to be, ish implies a viable person, a person who we expect to grow to adulthood. So that explains why we had these 2 verses. So now that we've explained those verses, we go back to asking questions about hitting parents. So maybe not only do you get punished for hitting a parent with a death penalty, if you hit a parent, and not if you kill the parent. But maybe it's if you hit the parent, even if you don't inflict a wound. Maybe if you were to just, pat them on the back, that would be considered hitting a parent. So alama tanan, if that were true, alama tanan, hamake aviv imo, eino chayiv ad sheyaseh behen chabura. But if that were true, we would have, we would have a Mishnah, this Mishnah, as we're going to see, I think tomorrow, it says specifically that you're only liable for hitting a parent if, in fact, you wound them. So how do I know that, in fact, a wound is necessary? So Amar Kra, Make Adam, Umake Bahema. There is a pasuk that juxtaposes. There's one pasuk that references both hitting humans and hitting animals. The pasuk is Vayikra Perakav Dalad pasuk Kaf Aleph, Umake Bahema Yishalomena, Umake Adam Yumat. That when it comes to hitting an animal, you pay, and when it comes to hitting a person or killing a person, then you get killed. So what's the story there? So that because when it comes to hitting an animal, where there's a pasuk that says umake nefesh behema yishalamena, so as a result in Perakav Daled pasuk Yirchet of Vayikra, so that implies, by referencing the soul, and we know that the soul is considered to relate to the blood. So as a result, you have to effectively see blood in order to have some kind of wound that is going to trigger an obligation to pay money. So too, when it comes to a person, you are only going to be liable if you make a wound. But when second, Maskif la Rav Yirmiyah says that doesn't make sense. If you put a whole bunch of stones on top of an animal and overload it, and now that animal can no longer lift a heavy burden because its muscles were all busted, even though there's no wound on it, are you really telling me that you would not be liable for damaging such an animal in that way? That's not true. So it can't be that this hekesh of it can't be that you're learning from an animal that you have to cause bleeding for an animal to tell us that you have to cause bleeding for a parent, because in fact it's not true that you have to cause bleeding for an animal. So in fact it's the following: Ella im eino inyan lenefesh behema daha inami hechikisha ba'avanim chayiv teneu inyan lenefesh adam. So we're going to use the principle of im eino inyan, that in fact you're right, Rebbe Yirmiyah. You can be subject to liability for injuring an animal without causing blood to be spilled or to a wound. But as a result, since we can't use the word nefesh in that pasuk to tell us about hitting an animal and the fact that you need a wound, so as a result, we'll use that word nefesh for another purpose, to tell us that when it comes to hitting a parent, you're only going to be liable if, in fact, you make a wound. So in second, Ela Hakesha Lamali, why do we need, so then what is the purpose of having the teaching about hitting an animal and hitting a person in that same verse? Because remember, we cited that verse, as creating that juxtaposition and thereby connecting hitting a human being and hitting a person and hitting an animal. So what is that doing? Meaning, what lesson is that teaching? It's the way the yeshiva of Chizkiah taught. We saw this a couple of days ago, and it's also in Baba Kama, that and we take a look in Rashi. Rashi is right opposite the Tosfos Ella Laman on the right hand side is the Rashi. Look at the Tanya de Bechazkia. But Baba Kama beheminiach, that in the chapter Heminiach it says Daf Lamed Hey Yamad Aleph Lifter Chayve Misos Shogigin Min Hatashlumin, that if you kill somebody by accident, you would not be subject to having to pay any kind of damages payment, according to Bechizkiah, because they said that just as somebody who injures an animal, and we saw this lesson a few days ago, that just as somebody who injures an animal is always going to be liable, whether you do it in purpose or you do it by accident or you do it, with an intention or unintentionally, it doesn't make a difference. You're always going to be subject to liability because you are a human being, and we say Adam muad la'olam in connection with doing damages. When it comes to hitting a person, we're going to say that similarly, we're going to make a uniform rule. And the uniform rule obviously can't be that you always are liable, because we have the ruling of Kimle B'derabamine, that you only apply the most severe punishment. And so instead the ruling is that we are never going to make one liable for damages if you in fact kill somebody. And so, and now you might be wondering, like, why would we do that? Well, one of the reasons may be is that, look, we don't want you to get off so easy. The point is that you really should be much more liable than just paying damages. That paying damages may make you feel like you have achieved tshuva, when that in fact is not the case. So again, ma makem bahema lo chelkas, so too we won't make any distinction among make ish as well. So that is what we learn from the juxtaposition of make nefesh behema with I'm sorry, make behema with make adam. So honey de islay tana de bechizkia. Okay, well that works, meaning the lesson that you just taught us, that the yeshiva of Chizkiah taught, it works according to those who agree to that lesson. But elaman de leislay tana de bechizkia hekesha lamali. We still need to explain, why do we have this connection between hitting an animal and hitting a person if you don't hold of the lesson of Chizkiah? So ma make behema l'refua patur, af make adam l'refua patur. No, it's teaching us something different. That when you hit an animal for healing, so too you're going to be exempt. Meaning, if you're a um, uh, if you're an animal doctor and you hit and you know take blood or whatever, you're obviously you can't the owner of the animal can't then sue you for damages. So too, if you are a doctor of people, you're going to also not be subject to penalty if you are engaging in healing. So in second, because for example, they asked Ben Mao. All right, so now based on this, they asked the question: Ben Mao Shiakis Dam Aviv, is a son allowed to let blood from the father, meaning to take blood from the father? Rav Masna Amar V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We have a principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and Rashi says this is 1, 2, 3, from the bottom of the narrow lines in Rashi, 6, 9, 10, about almost 30 lines up. The only thing that was prohibited for you to do to other people is what you would not want done to yourself. But if you have an illness and you need to give blood and you need to have surgery, so then you want to have that surgery. And so as a result, of course you would want it for yourself. And so as a result, you'd be allowed to do it to other people. Rav Dimi Bar Chanana Amar Makei Adam Umakei Behema. And Rav Dimi Bar says, actually, that's what we can learn from this connection of Makei Adam and Makei Behema. That's the meaning that this is the proof text that we can learn that one who heals somebody, who heals an animal, is just like one who heals a person. That just like patur, just as one who hits a person is going to be exempt, so to somebody who hits a person is going to be exempt. Rav lo shavik librei lemishgale silva. Nonetheless, Rav did not allow his son to remove a splinter from his skin. Mar Bray the Ravina, and similarly, Mar the son of Ravina, lo shavik librei lemiftach leibkavta. He did not let his son lance a boil. Because he was worried that his son might accidentally cause a wound, and that would accidentally violate this prohibition. Well, in that case, why would we even let a regular doctor who's not related to the person do it also? Shouldn't we be worried about accidental infliction of a wound? No, achar shigigas lav. When it comes to somebody else, it's just a negative transgression. And so as a result, we can be lenient with respect to a plain negative transgression. But beno shigigas chenek. But when it comes to the person's son, then you would be subject to strangulation. It's a death penalty situation. 1 second, you're telling me that a death penalty situation is so bad that we would never let one do it, even if one could violate something by accident. But we learned in a Mishnah in Masechah Shabbos and Daf Kuf Chaf Bet Amud Bet, Machat shal yad litolba es hakotes, that you're allowed to use a needle to remove a thorn. So lechosh del machavel, but maybe we should be worried that you're going to inflict a wound. V'hav yesh la skila, and now you'll have an accidental or an unintentional violation of a prohibition that's subject to stoning, which is of course worse than subject to strangulation. Even according to Rabbi Shimon, stoning is worse than strangulation. Everybody agrees to that. So Hasam Mekalkelhu. No, that is a situation because it's a destructive act. And Rashi, last Rashi on Pei Dalet Amud Bet, V'chol hamakalkelin peturin b'chol Shabbos. Any kind of destruction is exempt from the violation of violating Shabbos, the Melechas Machshavos Ksiv, because you need to have some kind of intentional act. Ve'ein mechayev hamakalkel elo Rabbi Shimon, and the only one who says you're liable for destruction is Rabbi Shimon. U'mekalkel b'chabura. Rabbi Shimon nami lo mechayev ela b'miskavin. And when it comes to somebody who's wounding somebody, Rabbi Shimon says you're only subject to the penalty if you intend to create the wound. So lekach dahavi tzarech lechavala. Aval hanotel kotes and that's where you have to make the wound. But here, when you're removing a thorn, Ein sarach l'chaval. There's no need for a wound. Dibritzono lo yichval. Ideally he would not cause any wound. So hanicha. So now the Gemara, back into the Gemara. We're third line from the bottom of Pei Dalon Mabed. Hanicha l'man da'amar mekalkel pater el l'man da'amar chayiv. But what about according to Rabbi Shimon? As Rashi just noted, Rabbi Shimon tells us that you're liable for a destructive act. So Ma'ika Lamemer, what is there to say? So again, following as Rashi just explained, who is it that says that if you do a destructive act of wounding, you're going to be liable? It's only Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon, as we turn to Pei Hey Amud Aleph, Rabbi Shimon ha'amar kol malacha she'ein tzricha legufa patur alah. And Rabbi Shimon's the one who says that if you don't need that outcome, if you're not desiring the specific outcome that you're getting, well, then you're going to be exempt for punishment. So here, when the person is trying to either pop the boil or whatever it is that they're trying to do, they're not trying to, and here in connection with the Shabbos, it's talking about removing the thorn. They're not trying to cause the person with the thorn to bleed. Rather, they're just trying to remove the thorn. They don't want the bleeding. Ideally, it wouldn't be any bleeding. And so as a result, that is not the situation that we say that you're subject to liability. And so either because it's destructive or because it's not the outcome that you wanted, we would say that you're not liable and it is permitted. And so as a result, when it comes to being a doctor for a parent, a child needs to be very careful. They need to be very aware of what they're doing, because ideally they should let somebody else take care of the parent, at least when it comes to the possibility of performing surgery or things like that, where we need to be worried about an accidental causing of wounding. So we will end there. And now the Gemara is going to point out a situation where a father may be where a son, may be allowed to hit his father. I should say son there. But for those details, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Have a great day. Looking forward to learning together. Again, all this week, 7:45, except for Friday, Purim. Purim will be at 7 o'clock in the morning. Will be Zoom only, and Dov will be leading that. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.